Hello and welcome to the Animation Communication podcast, your source for discussion about animation, film, fandom, and more. So please join your host, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, or KP, and Lauren Kizich, the Abbey Roadie, for today's discussion. If you like what you hear, please remember to support by giving a like, a follow, as well as subscribing to the main I Love Kim Possible a Lot channel on YouTube. Spread the word and keep being a part of a great community. This episode is appropriate for all ages.
Hi, welcome everyone to this week of Animation Communication podcast time thing. I'm KP as usual, and Lauren's here.
Hello.
And we have a guest today. Yay!
Woo!
So, totally professional podcast. So we'll just kind of jump right to it. Guest person, Chris, do you want to talk about yourself and who you are and what you do and why you breathe air?
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me on the show. My name is Chris Sonnenberg. I am the executive producer, co-creator, and showrunner for Tangled, the series on the Disney Channel. I guess I will just answer whatever questions you guys have for me. I can kind of talk a little bit about what I do, but I leave it in your guys' good hands.
Okay, Lauren, why don't you go first since you were kind of the master of all the questions.
Yeah, sure. Because I want to really hone in on some of the more industry-related questions in terms of like your position and what comes with your role. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you do as an executive producer, as a showrunner. Tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. So I have been in the industry since 1994, 95. Pocahontas. Well, actually, my first job was on a show called The Critic, which was a show that aired alongside The Simpsons on Fox. And it was a John Lovitz show. And as kind of one of my first jobs getting into the industry, doing something called character layout, which was a glorified animation for television type job. Back in the 90s, we would take the storyboard panels and kind of flesh them out in terms of acting and performance and send those overseas to be animated. It was a really fun job, and it really got my feet wet. And from there, I worked on a movie called The Swan Princess. I don't know if anybody has heard of,
I love
that
it.
franchise, but that was one of my first movies I worked on. Then went to Disney to work on Pocahontas and Hunchback and Hercules and Mulan and Tarzan and Emperor's New Groove and a lot of the fun hand-drawn movies from the 90s. And kind of once Disney stopped doing hand-drawn animation in the early 2000s, and I loved hand-drawn animation so much that it started to turn into something that I had to learn how to do something new. And I started working on commercials, these Barbie commercials back in the kind of early 2000s, where I actually had to take on the position of directing animation because I worked for a commercial house where they didn't really do a lot of animation. So when I started there, they were in charge of doing like all the commercial work. In other words, like the print ads and the live action shoots and a lot of the graphic design that was around all of that. But part of that also was the animation, but they didn't have any experience with that. So when they brought me on, they asked if I would direct the animation on it. And I said, sure, I would love to. And that's when I started to really learn and fall in love with the whole process of animation, learning about layout and ink and paint and backgrounds and cleanup and all the different parts of the process that up until then were just kind of like other departments at Disney. But now I had to really learn about them and run them and deliver on a project. And that's kind of how I started on my road to being an executive producer.
Yeah, when we were looking up your IMDb, Lauren just like, look at all the stuff, look at all the 90s stuff, and I'm just
Sure.
like, Lauren, calm down.
It was a fun time to be in animation for sure. Like we had come I was at California Institute of the Arts, Cal Arts,
Mm-hmm.
in starting in 1990, and we were kind of coming off of the big success of um, The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, and there started to be this resurgence of hand-drawn animation, and they needed, Disney and really the bulk of the industry really needed a lot of people to take up what was going to be a growing demand of films at the time. So we just kind of, me and all my classmates really got in at a really special time to really support all of the films that were going to be made throughout the 90s. And it was a really fun time to be at the studio. It was a lot of really fun camaraderie. We had a really great time. The films were special to me in that they were, again, we were at the studio having a great time working on these like classic movies. And it just was a really special time. I got to meet some of my best friends there, to which I'm still friends to this day. So those times, I met my wife while I was working on Hercules. So a lot of those kind of fun things where they're not only great movies that you can go see and be proud of, but also these huge moments in your life that you look back on with a lot of love and a lot of care that went into them, but also like the times that we had, and really these bonding moments through through which we became like lifelong friends. So it was a really fun time to be there.
I love the sense
Oh,
of
it's so sweet.
I love the sense of camaraderie, and actually, like, it's not just a movie. It's you're making friendships for life through it.
Totally. Yeah, that's exactly. As a matter of fact, I just had lunch today with my good friend of mine named Dave Pimentel, who, we both started on Pocahontas around the same time, and we're still friends to this day. So really, really great experience, and fun time to be at the studio for sure.
Was there any one particular movie or certain movies that that tickled your fancy, and what like maybe it's like you have a penchant for comedy and stuff like that? Were there particular movies that
It's funny. I get asked that a lot, and I really do associate the films with my experiences on them. So, working on Hercules, I was working with Andreas Deja on the main character Hercules. Again, that's when I kind of met and married my wife during those 2 or 3 years. So that movie in particular, in terms of the experience that I had on it, was particularly memorable. And we had an office with three of us in it, and we just had such a great time. And I just remember those those people, and that movie was such great memories.
Mm. No, I understand that. That's I especially because Hercules is one of my personal favorites out of the
Yeah.
Renaissance, and I didn't get to meet her, but I did get acknowledged by Susan Egan. So
Oh
Meg's
wow.
one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So
Amazing. Yeah. I just again like spent the weekend working on some story stuff for a new project I'm working on with a buddy of mine who I worked on that movie with, and we were at a friend's house, and they have young kids, and Hercules is their favorite movie, and he was working on Megara at the time, and I was working on Hercules, and so the mom was saying like, "Hey, this is you're looking at Meg and Hercules, and here's these two big dumpy old men, like it's just kind of funny and we both looked at each other like, wow, that was such a long time ago, and it was so we don't even really think about it in terms of like being, you know, I mean, at this point, it's kind of like a classic, a new classic, and to have been there at that time is such an honor.
yeah, I was gonna say, do you see Ken Duncan much?
I don't see Ken. Uh, he came in to do a little bit of uh, we almost had him do some work on the show Tangled the series. So it was great to kind of to catch up with him. He has a studio in Pasadena,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a studio in Pasadena while I was working at James Baxter's studio in when we were doing Enchanted.
Mm.
And so we would see the two studios were basically kind of across the street from each other in Pasadena, so we would see each other in passing at lunches or whatever.
Did you
But
ever meet up at King Taco?
Not there. We were more on like Old Town. We were on Colorado,
Okay.
and so there were a couple places that we would eat down there, kind of closer to Old Town. But such a fun time. But yeah, Ken's a good friend. We used to go play cards at his house
Mm,
back in the '90s. It was a lot of fun.
that's great.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Lauren, you grew up in Pasadena, right?
Yeah, actually, I'm born and raised.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were on Mill Street. So I don't know if you know, there's a little alley called Mill Street down off of Colorado
Yeah.
right there. And we did Enchanted there.
Oh, wow.
And the animation, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Kung Fu Panda,
Mm-hmm.
but like all that opening sequence of Kung Fu Panda that was all more that graphic hand-drawn style stuff. We did all of that there as well at James Baxter's studio. It was such an honor. We did such beautiful work there.
Well, James Baxter's the man.
He is the man. He is,
That's
in fact, the man.
Yeah, and it's beautiful
Yeah.
work. That's some of my favorite parts out of the Kung Fu Panda series have been the 2D animated aspects, and it's not necessarily because I favor 2D or anything, but it is, but it was like that the stylistic change, being able to use that as not only as a dream conveyor but also as a flashback conveyor. That it's just I always like when you have like a style change
Yeah.
between scenes like that. So
Yeah, and in particular, working on that sequence, something that James was very adamant about was doing something that was, so we had just completed our work on Enchanted, which was very traditional and very like we always wanted the animation from Enchanted to kind of feel like one of the lost classic Disney films. And so we did everything very classically drawn and classically animated. We had classic, exposure sheets made. We did everything very traditional, as traditional as we could get away with without doing actual cells. But then going from Enchanted on to Kung Fu Panda, James and I both talked a lot about doing something that was really different from what we had done on Enchanted. And so coming up with this really graphic, limited style, we only did, as a studio, we only did the first movie, and I know Ken Duncan has done some of the other animation for the other films, but that first movie, and particularly the animation style of that sequence, really was born out of James's head of how we wanted to move the characters and really see the graphic style of the those sequences be played out. And it was really risky, and it was new for the time. A lot of people were asking us how we pulled it off. And there's one way where you just go straight ahead and you animate it, which I think a lot, as they started moving forward in the series, they did. But looking at our sequence in particular, we really approached that animation from a very experimental standpoint. If you look at that sequence in particular, that was kind of the first time people had really used puppet animation in that way. We were mixing puppet animation with James's traditional style, um, and then doing stuff inside of After Effects. Like we were using a bunch of After Effects tricks together in a way that we hadn't ever seen before. So it was really an opportunity to go from something very traditional and Enchanted into something really experimental in Kung Fu Panda. So it was such a great opportunity, and we had a lot of fun doing that too.
absolutely.
But I think you guys want to talk about Tangled a little bit. I hope. I mean, I don't want to spend all my
Well,
time
well,
on my history. We could be here for a long time.
whatever, really, Lauren. What do you want to move on to?
I mean, we can cover a little bit more on, because I know a lot of listeners are either just getting into the industry or just
Yeah,
even getting into animation in general and are like, hey, this is what I want to do with my life, but where do I start?
sure.
So it's kind of like we want to be able to hear from everybody and anybody in the industry from their experience, and just like hearing about the importance of like team communication and how feels to work on a team, and the importance of collaboration. Um, So, like, what are some of the challenges of like being an executive producer on, especially when you think of like you were working on a hit show with Tangled? How do you? What are the challenges of being a producer with a pre-established IP?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of the way we developed the show, and then we can talk a little bit about my role when it comes to the crew. So, um, when they first came to me to develop a show based on the movie, I've talked about this in the past a few times, but it was really ask they didn't ask me for anything in particular. They said, "Here's the title. Um, these are the characters." They didn't really give me any restrictions. I said, like, "Can we get Mandy and Zach?" And they're like, "Sure, if you can get them, like, like, they basically they basically said, don't limit yourself right out of the bat, like, just come up with a good story and then we'll go from there." So, I we had long conversations about, should it be a preschool show, should it be something, is she still in the tower, like, is it a prequel, but then that was really limiting. Like, we had a lot of conversations about, like, what it would actually be about. And I kind of cleared I had a few conversations with early conversations with Claire Keene, who was Glenn Keane's daughter, who, I don't know if you guys know, but she was the inspiration behind the character, because she's so amazingly creative in her own life. She's a dancer, a singer, an artist. Like, she's every bit of an inspiration behind Rapunzel as anybody. But just kind of, and we've been friends for many years. Having a conversation with her about, like, what a show could look like, and she just encouraged me to not sell it short, to really do the best version of the show that I thought needed to be done. So with her encouragement, I just started plowing forward on what I thought the best version of a continuation of the film would be. And that started to just naturally, I started asking the questions, well, if we're going to make a show, like, what do we want to talk about? And I had, at the time, I had a 15 and a 13-year-old girl at home, my two daughters, Ariana and Catalina, and I was just looking at their lives. Of course, they loved the movie so much,
Mm.
and I was like, well, if they love the movie so much, what are the things that they're going through right now? And my daughter, was thinking about going into high school, and there were challenges with her friends and challenges with us as her parents. And I just thought, well, if those are the things that my daughters are going through, it seemed like the best thing to kind of have a conversation with, to the people who love the movie, would be to have these same discussions. So it really started to become, what does Rapunzel need uh, out of this series? And when I obviously saw the short where they get married, I was like, well, I think that it would be great to have the discussion about what it looks like for a couple to work through just getting to know each other, and certainly this young, capable woman learning what it's like to become a leader, and to be a daughter, and to be a fiance, and all of these huge things that just don't come overnight. And so it just became like, how do we lay out a narrative that would, in the most entertaining way, tell that story? So it started to kind of lay itself in. Well, like, well, what are some things that my daughter deals with? And it's, she had a best friend at the time, and I'm like, well, what would Rapunzel's best friend look like? So we started to kind of sketch in, idea wise, what Cassandra looked like. And it was a very easy conversation of, well, if the one side of the mythology was this very soft yellow, S curve hair, what is the other side of that? And that just started to become like, I just started drawing out these really sharp rocks, and it just, one thing led to another, and it started to kind of lay in this narrative that it just made sense to me. And also, what you also have to kind of understand is that I had just kind of come off of Gravity Falls,
Mm.
and seeing the terrain at the time in terms of like what the shows looked like on the channel in terms of their time, like how many seasons they were getting. Everything was kind of getting like 2 or 3 seasons. So I was like, well, I don't want to get canceled. So, and I don't think that there's a ton of stories to be told, like, will they, won't they get married? So we can only tell so many stories about, the idea of Rapunzel and Eugene being engaged. So it just made sense to do a beginning, middle, and end story. So we just, with the first things I wrote on a piece of paper and put them up on a board were like year 1, year 2, year 3, and that just became our big kind of sketching, idea wise. Like we started sketching in like what do the 3 movements of this series look like, and that's kind of how it started.
Mm. So did you have it in your head from the get-go that it was gonna be a story that was gonna be told in 3 years and
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, no, I knew very quickly that but Tangled itself was so specific in that it was, obviously it's a Disney feature film, and it has this very large, you know, the mythology isn't huge, but it felt epic in the relationships. And so just, being in a room thinking about what was appropriate for a series, the conversations just kept circling around like, let's keep it limited, let's make it special, let's make it emotional. Of course, music came into it very early. Like, what are we going to do music wise? I was very adamant about getting Mandy and Zach back on board. And so once we had a solid story in place, it's general, but it was fairly locked in fairly early. The studio was very supportive in saying like, well, let's see if Mandy and Zach would be involved. And so I personally went out to them and pitched them and showed them the 3 seasons and how emotional and how much I loved the characters and how much I loved the story. And they just got behind me and became my cheerleaders for this whole thing. Like Zach is very protective of the character and very protective of the mythologies that he gets involved with. And so he had a lot of questions about, what the rocks represented and, how we were going to treat Eugene, and once he saw that I had a very clear idea of what these things meant and how we were going to treat them, he was like, "Chris, we'll do. We're in." Like he and Mandy both kind of got together, and they were completely supportive. So once we had Zach and Mandy, it became like, the next logical next step was like, well, if they're going to sing, I'm not having them sing anything other than Alan Menken music.
Of
So the
course.
studio put us on a plane and we flew out to New York, and I met with Alan Menken in his studio, and I had my little laptop with my PowerPoint on it and walked him, and here's
Wow.
Alan Menken who, didn't have to do this. And I'll be honest, he probably didn't really want to do it in the beginning, a series version of something that was so special. But again, like once he understood the large vision of the show, he and Glenn Slater both, Glenn Slater really, the lyricist, really got behind us. And Glenn is an amazing lyricist in terms of his story skill. So when he saw the story, he's like, yeah, like I think we have something to say about this. And they got behind it. Like within an hour, they were in, and we flew back to California, having Zach and Mandy and Alan Menken all and Glenn Slater all on board.
Wow.
So that was kind of
Yeah.
the fuse that lit the dynamite on this thing, and we just, after that it became character designs and art direction, and we were off to the races.
Wow. Yeah, it's really like invigorating to know that you have people that are just as passionate about it as you are. So it's especially I couldn't envision anyone else other than Zach and Mandy being in in the roles. So it's
It's so funny because, very early on, again, like, we're all looking at this from this side looking back, but very early, the discussions were like, what does a sound-alike sound like? And we did get a few actresses in that maybe kind of sounded like Mandy, but as soon as I started hearing those, I was like, there's no way. Like the
Mhm.
charm of who this character is, like Mandy is Rapunzel. Not just in her vocal performance, but just in her attitude and her positivity and her brightness
Mm-hmm.
and her like her struggle. It's not just she's not just one note, and that's kind of what we had to understand from the writing position, but her performance, she really got behind the performance of this character every time she came in. She understood the pain, she understood the struggle, she understood the highs and the lows in a way that if we had gotten anybody else, I just feel like it would have fallen flat. Same thing with Zach. Like I mean, we all know like Eugene is Zachary Levi. I mean,
Yes.
come on, right? Like it's just him. He's not doing a character. I mean, of course there's some nuances obviously that make Eugene who he is, but when Zach starts reading these lines, I mean, it's him. Like he's bringing so much of this character to the front. And if we were to get anybody else that was trying to be Zach Levi, it just did not. It didn't appeal to me once I started really considering it. It just
Mhm.
kind of became like, well, what are we gonna do if we don't get him? Like, I don't know. I don't know that I would have wanted to be involved, honestly.
Yeah. It's kind of like
It
if
was too
Ryan
important.
Reynolds like wasn't Deadpool and you had somebody else try to be Ryan Reynolds being Deadpool, you'd totally know
It's
it wouldn't
almost
be.
like they wrote the character of Deadpool like they knew Ryan someday would play him as a person. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's just that guy. And so much of the appeal of the entire franchise comes down to the appeal of these amazing performers. And then, obviously, so again, being on this side of it, then the huge challenge once we landed them, then the giant challenge became, okay, so who are we going to get to be Cassandra? Because here are two major performers that people already associate with the franchise, like Rapunzel and Eugene,
Mm-hmm.
and then Zach and Mandy, and now who are we going to pull in that could possibly hold their own against these two powerhouses? And that was a big challenge to find someone that had the same amount of um, presence and appeal and charm, but still have that like power behind them. And Cassandra specifically had to have a certain amount of like, again, like pain behind her. I knew really early, you guys, I'm so sorry, but I knew exactly what was going to happen with Cassandra. So I knew when we were casting that Cassandra was going to sing a very large song in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of season 2. Like I knew that song was going to come. I told Alan Menken in the pitch, like, there's going to be this huge song for this character in season 2. Waiting in the Wings was going to be this. I didn't know what the name of the song was. I didn't know anything about the plot. I just knew that we were going to keep her under wraps until that moment. And so when Eden came in the room and started speaking, like it became very clear who our Cassandra was.
Mm-hmm.
But that was such a large challenge to be able to find somebody that could not only stand next to Zach and Mandy, but really, and then looking at how how much of a breakout character she became. Like some people, that she's their favorite character,
Mm-hmm. And
Mhm.
and
and that
no
speaks.
no better person than Elphaba herself.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I didn't really even know that she was Alpha, but I had seen casting had given me a couple videos of Eden, and one of them was from the Today Show. She had done a video, she had done like a live performance on the Today Show for a musical she was doing in New York. She had done, this was years ago, called Brooklyn. And she had done this song. Live there, that when I saw that song, I was like, that is Cassandra. Um, so at that point, you know, there was a little bit of discussion of like some other actresses that were from Disney. I think they had given me a couple names of some regulars from their live action shows, but they sounded too young
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted Cassandra to be a little bit older. I wanted her to be older than Rapunzel for specifically the moment when she understood her relationship to Gothel.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wanted her to sound different enough from Mandy. So a lot of the voices that we were getting kind of sounded very similar to Mandy in that they were a little bit, higher register. And so when you heard the two of them together, you almost couldn't pick out who was who. And so I was like, no, we can't do as wonderful as a performer as this person is. Cassandra, Eden, I call her Cassandra. Eden she just had her own space audibly, and that just helped the casting so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a phenomenal cast. I mean, just everyone is so distinct, and like you said, they stand all on their own, that's so crucial in order to help define each character as their own personality rather than just an ensemble. So I think
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and I put a lot of my own personal weight on the idea that the Broadway sensibility.
Mm-hmm.
So when casting was asking like who do you want to pull from, I was like, there's going to be a lot of big music in this thing. I don't know exactly what songs people are going to sing, but it's going to be better if you pull from Broadway these bigger voices. And I think in the end of the day, because I'm a big Broadway nerd kid, like my mom certainly raised me on a healthy diet of Broadway musicals, um and I certainly believe that Disney animation is the new version of the Hollywood musical. Certainly Little
Mhm.
Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, like those just feel like modern day Broadway musicals. And so when it came to pulling in the cast for this thing, I just said like, it's going to be better if we can pull in these larger voices from Broadway, and ultimately that was the key to I think the ensemble, um the key to that success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was gonna say, do you have any other questions, KP?
No, I'm just entertained listening to this about animation lore.
Well, I hope
So you know,
listen. You guys would probably learn. I don't know from other interviews, but I can be long-winded, and I'm so sorry
No,
that I can
actually, no,
talk a little bit
it's
too much.
fantastic
But
because as I'm going through some of these questions, I'm like, you actually already answered some of these questions.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. My influences definitely come from people like Howard Ashman, who wrote the lyrics for, you know, for me as a like I'm a I think I'm a freshman in high school. I go see this movie called Little Shop of Horrors.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And Little Shop of Horrors, like before even like Little Mermaid came out, was speaking to me from a standpoint of a super large musical that is dynamic, full of like really fun characters. It's really weird looking. It's super fun. And then to find out that Howard Ashman and Alan Menken wrote the music for it, I was like, this is so. I mean, I don't know if you guys knew that, but this
Yeah.
is the same people that made the Little Mermaid and
Mm-hmm.
subsequently all of these Disney classics. But that started to kind of light a fire in me, and like, oh, this is something that I may want to be a part of. And then a couple years later, when Little Mermaid came out, that really solidified like, oh no, this is what I want to do.
So you got to be
But
part of
just
that world.
yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Oh wow, too soon. Hashtag too soon. But yeah, I certainly saw, yeah, just like you said, I wanted to be part of that world in the sense that I'd never even seen a piece of animation paper when I applied to Cal Arts. Like I just knew that this really dynamic way of telling a story was something that I saw myself being a part of. And then, again, like going from the animation part of the process to the showrunner part of it, I got to really learn the entire process and have fallen in love with all of that. And that kind of talks a little bit about, I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about what I do as a showrunner,
Mm-hmm.
but um but what I but what I do as a showrunner is I do get to take part in the entire process, which is so fun for me. I mean, being able to take part in the writing, take part in the design process, go over the boards, all the way through background design and paint, all the way through. So I'm involved basically in every single part of the process. So everything that happens on the show goes through me, whether it's the voice recording, I make notes on the animation, I'm looking at backgrounds, I'm making notes on color script. We go to the final, you know, sound mix where we design the sound effects and the even the score. Kevin Cleach, who writes our amazing score on the show, I'm involved in sitting down in his studio and going through every scene and saying, like, Kevin and I will sit and I'll say, like, this needs to be a little bit either funnier or darker or a little bit more emotion, or even like, let's pull music out of the sequence altogether. Let's just let the performance speak in this sequence. So I'm there for the entire process from top to bottom, and it really becomes this exercise in keeping, you know, ultimately 70 episodes of storylines straight in my head through every different part of the production. So there were times in our second season when we had, dozens of episodes all going at the same time. Premise for season 3, animation for season 2, boarding for season 2, animation notes for season 1 that were coming in, all these different parts of the process that were happening at the same time from any given meeting that I was going to from one moment to the next. Me and my co-executive producer, Ben Balistreri, we would constantly be having to switch gears from writing to design to sound, and you just have to kind of keep the clarity. And there was a lot of pressure for both of us. I was so lucky to have somebody like Ben who shared a huge amount of brain space with me. Like, we would always, uh, I feel like we could finish each other's sentences on so many subjects. He knew what I wanted in terms of the mythology. I knew what he leaned towards when it came to sound effects or color. And we typically went to every meeting together, but if we had to split up, I had every confidence that he had my back, and he had the same thing. He knew that if I went into something that he was going to agree with the decisions that I made. So it was really important that we have it. First of all, I think it's really important to have somebody like that with you in a production, having somebody that you trust with your creative vision. It's just invaluable. If I could ever give anybody advice going into creating a show, if you do it on your own, it's such a pressure filled scenario, that without having somebody just to be able to talk to, just to have a buddy of yours that understands the pressures of production is so invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really important to me in terms of having, a partner in this thing. And then knowing that if I couldn't be at a certain meeting or a series of meetings, that I knew that he had my back. It was so freeing to know that I didn't have to stress over that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, it's with how much that goes into the process. Yeah. No, anybody would lose their head if they if they had to take it on themselves.
I mean, you mean argument could be made that we did lose our heads sometimes, like there was a lot of pressure. I mean, we didn't make every right decision along the way, but we tried to keep each other in check.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to make sure, we'd always look at each other like, is that the right thing? Like, what do you think about that? And we would talk things out. And because we were so mind melded, there wouldn't have to be super long conversations, and we would just give each other the nod and like the thumbs up, like, dude, rad. Like, when we would see a beat come together that we knew wasn't like, there would be certain gags, like a funny gag or even a dramatic thing that would happen that all throughout script or storyboard or editorial, it just would never land. And we just be like, oh man, like, I wish that could be funnier, or I wish that was a little bit more dramatic, and then go all the way through editorial and animation and have it come back and be like, oh, I wish that could be something just a little bit better. And then go all the way to like sound design, and our sound designer would like hit something with like a little sound effect or with a little beat, and we look over each other, in the mixing stage, and like give each other the Mr. Miyagi smile of like, yeah, dude, like, we nailed it, like, it finally came together. But it's something that we both shared as a struggle for so much of the process. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's not just me being like, oh, I nailed it. Like, we had each other to be able to say like, is that what you wanted? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, and we'd high five each other and be like, dude, that came out great. Or like, oh, we'll get him next time. That was the great thing about it, is that having somebody like that, you shared like, we would check each other to make sure that our intentions were always constant, and then to be able to like give the thumbs up of like, oh, cool, that was great, or like, oh shoot, that could have been better. But we had each other along the whole way, so it was really, really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just imagine, because it was a serial and you had to keep like the order of episodes in mind and just make sure like everything meshed that way. I can imagine that getting confusing really fast.
Oh, extremely fast. And what Ben was so good at is he knew, like, I don't know how he does it. He's just got one of these brains that's good at numbers, but he could recite an episode number, whereas I had to think of like the name of the episode. Like, I was an episode title guy, or like, not even a title. I'd be like, it's that one with the monkey would do that thing with the coins, and he's like, oh, that's 214, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, 214. Like, like, I was more concerned about the story aspect of it, but he always had a really organized brain in terms of like being able to tell a production person where a design was. Like, oh, that's an episode 214, scene 93. Like, he was super good at that kind of stuff. So again, like, it's that balance of like someone that's passionate about one part of it and the other person takes the other part of it. We were very balanced that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how showrunners just do it by themselves now.
I can't even imagine. I mean, if it's serialized like ours, like if there's a big mythology, I just don't understand how somebody would do that. It just seems too much. It seems like way too much information, especially for our show that had so many characters and so many plot lines going. I couldn't imagine doing it on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brain hurts thinking about it.
Yeah. And mine hurt pretty regularly.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is like, even if you had the finite, like, everything down to the T as far as episodes, when everything's starting to get made at different times as far as the production process, then it's just like, boop.
Yeah, and again, like, because we had each other, it just became this kind of like sharing brains thing, where like we would look at each other. If someone brought up a question in a room, in a vacuum, like they're asking something that is very like localized to that moment, we're both looking at each other like, okay, if we make this decision, what does this undo 12 episodes from now? Or what does this contradict 3 episodes before this? You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to kind of answer and keep all these things so that any decision that you're making doesn't have any like undue repercussions that another director is dealing in it with an episode, another, you know what I mean, of the whole nother show, because we have 3 different directors, 4 different board artists. I mean, 4 different board teams with 2 board artists. There's just a ton of art being generated that if any one decision gets made, you have to make sure that tracks over, X amount of episodes. And I think we caught, there's an amazing part of the process that I've never talked about in any interview that I think I'm going to shed some light on for you guys here. It's called checking. Do you guys know what checking is?
No, please
Oh
learn
my
us.
goodness, this is such a crazy job. Um, we had an amazing checker. Her name was Charlene. And what a checker does is, imagine this is somebody's job. And this is a crazy job for this show. So Charlene's job was to go through every storyboard before we shipped it to Canada to be animated,
Mm-hmm.
and she would go through every storyboard and make sure that every single thing was constant from episode to episode, shot to shot. So in other words, if someone came into a room in a storyboard and put a cup down on the table, she had to make sure that that cup not only was designed and colored properly, but that cup was in every shot after that in the same position. So she's kind of like continuity, but she's also making sure, like, if the storyboard are like, so there's certain things like in a storyboard someone could be worried, like you would do a
Mm-hmm.
worry face,
Mm-hmm.
but then like some storyboard person would do like the sweat marks coming off of the side of your head just to kind of indicate the shorthand for being worried. Like, it's just a funny thing that you do as an artist. You just draw it because you want to convey, oh, they're worried, but you don't want to animate those like sweat drops shooting out of the side of a character. So she would go through every board and be like, do you want sweat marks coming off the side of it? And we'd have to say, no, Charlene. Or sometimes we would say, yeah, there is sweat coming down this thing. And then she asked, okay, well, was it designed? What color is it? Is it see-through? Like, I mean, so what we would do, so I'll set the scene for you. We have this big bullpen, this big meeting room, right? And the room would have a projector, so we would have the storyboards up on projected onto a big screen,
Mm-hmm.
and a big table, and around the table is the director, the production coordinator who like helps coordinate all of the artwork before we ship it. They're just the glue of the entire production. Charlene the checker, me, uh, and my co-EP Ben, and then the art director, Alan Bodner, who was the greatest human ever to walk the earth. So we're all sitting around this table, going through literally every single storyboard panel. And so what she's done is she's gone away and she's taken like 5 days or however many days that she has per episode, and she has a printed out version of the storyboard, and she puts these little post-it notes on every panel that she has a question about. Okay? So we're going through, and I have the keyboard with the little arrow, and I'm going through the projection, going through every storyboard, and she's going through her printed board, and her printed board is just littered with these post-it notes. Like she would go through stacks of post-it notes through every episode, just hundreds of them.
Wow.
So you go through every panel, and she's like, is this what you want for the background? Do you guys have coverage for what this character looks like from the back? Like every tiny, tiny, tiny detail she would cover. And we would all have to sit there and ask Alan Bodner if the background was designed for this shot, or if the coordinator had the glass, what color is the sweat. Like, we'd have to go through every single tiny detail for every shot of the entire show. Now, that's a long way of saying it is the worst meeting that you could ever have to sit through and they were hours, like literally 3 or 4 hours, just literally going through every single shot. But the fun thing is that Charlene made it super fun. We would have games, she would have prizes, we would throw like, it could have been the worst meeting that you looked forward to every episode. But Charlene, our checker, made it the most fun. We had this thing called Last Note. Oh, I've never talked about this. This is so crazy. I hope your audience cares about this stuff. This is so dumb. But we had this game called Last Note, and so to keep everybody on their toes of as to like what to look for, because the director was there, and the director's kind of job is to make sure, like, if a director did his job perfectly, there would be zero notes. Like, he would go through, or she would go through, and make sure that everything is accounted for. Now, like, it's an impossible task. But what Charlene would do is at the end of the episode, like the very last note in the entire episode would be a mystery. She wouldn't say what it was, but we would all have to guess what the note was. And so it's because, like, I would play theme music, like we would all like get up and do a dance, like it was so fun. And so she would have a big box of wrapped gifts, and if you got the right if you guessed the right note, you would get a prize. Okay, so that's motivating people to be like, okay, so a lot of times you guys, this is so dumb. I'm telling you guys the most boring thing, and you can edit this out if you want to, but
No, this is
that's
actually
good.
fun. It's just good to know that it's like you're having fun at the same time of
it was the most fun. And what I'll do, okay, so what I'll do is I'll send you guys a picture. So what she did is she kept all the Post-its from the last, I think, 2
oh
seasons
my god.
in a giant crazy box of all Post-it notes with the notes on. I'll send you the picture of the giant pile of Post-it notes. But
Oh.
anyways, so we'd get to the last note, like 8 times out of 10, the note was, "Where's Pascal?" Because oftentimes when we're going through a thing, Pascal would be on Rapunzel's shoulder
Mhm.
for 4 of the panels, and then he'd be gone. Like the board person just wouldn't draw him, or like, and a lot of times the panel was just a circle, like a green dot. They would just draw a dot on Rapunzel's shoulder, but if that dot wasn't there, Charlene is like, where's Rapunzel? Like, where's Pascal? Is he on the shoulder? Did he go inside her hair? Did he run down? And then if we would be like, oh, he jumped down, we'd have to find the panel that he jumped down in.
Mhm.
Because the whole idea is that you don't want to send any of the, I hope you guys care about this stuff.
Oh,
This
I
is
do.
this is so like
Yeah.
technical. But the whole thing is that you don't want to send storyboards to your animation studio unless every single question is answered.
Mhm.
Because as an animator, so we have an amazing team in Canada named Mercury. And they get their animation, they get their storyboards, and they have to animate, and they get a package of all the background stuff, all the characters, all of the things that they need to be able to animate their scene. And if their storyboard doesn't have all the information, then that just stops their flow, and it just gums up the entire process. So the most important thing is to be able to ship a show with all of the information. And so that's what Charlene is doing. She's making sure that every shot has every bit of information included in the shot. So again, like, what's the background? Where did the monkey go? Where's Pascal? And so what would happen is when we play Last Note, is it became a game show. So everybody's yelling out, what's the background? Where's Pascal? Like, everybody's like trying to yell out like a potential last note, because we wanted to have you wanted to get the prize. And the prizes were typically a water gun or a sticky, like a thing that you would throw. And they were all like these really cheap toys that she would buy, but everybody wanted the last note
Mhm.
prize. And they were usually like these crazy, toxic, like terrible toys that we all like. Sometimes it was a puzzle, sometimes it was like a funny ring. Somehow Ben always got the BB-8 Star Wars toy. Like, I don't know if you guys know, but he's a big BB-8 collector, and somehow he would reach into the box of toys and pull out a wrap thing and unwrap it, and it would be a BB-8 thing, and we'd be like, how did he know it was a BB-8 thing? So that was really fun. So that I hope that was so long of a story to be. Hopefully that was
Oh
entertaining.
no, it absolutely
Checking.
was. Because I know
Some
it's
of the
all
meetings
about
were like
detail. So it's all about making
some of the
sure.
meetings could be like 4 hours long if they were like crazy notes, but we made sure that they were a lot of fun. So production can be monotonous, or it can be a such a fun time.
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard to keep, yeah, when you're that's why with storyboarding, it's one of those things where everything kind of leans on storyboarding, because going forward, I
Yes.
mean, when you're sending it off to another studio, that's what they're going off of. It's not like you're sitting with them every step of the way.
No.
You have to
Yeah.
depend on them to make sure that everything that you put down is getting put into animation. And if you leave something out, they're going to leave it out. So,
And let me just take this opportunity to say that we had by far the greatest storyboard and revision team in animation. Like going into the show, one of the things that I was the most passionate about, of course, coming from the feature, was the performance, right? So the performance behind, Rapunzel and and the main characters in the feature, the performances through, obviously through Glenn Keane's amazing performance direction was so uh, beyond any other film that they had up until that point. So I knew that a certain amount of what was going to make this show special was um, the great performances, and so I really wanted to give our board team the chance to really own these characters and really bring their performances to life on the board side. And then once we handed that over to Mercury, they would then lift it to another level on their side. But that being said, I had a very, very, very large demand on our board team to really go above and beyond in the performance of our shows, and they absolutely did it. And I owe our board team so much, and our revisionist team so much. They worked so hard. They were so diligent. They may have forgotten a Pascal every now and again, but what they gave us in terms of pathos and heart and emotion through the boards, you just don't see that in television.
Oh, no.
I mean, we really had a feature film level board team on Tangled the series, and I think a huge reason why the fans responded to the show. So much of it is writing, and we had an amazing writing team as well, led by Jace Rickey, who was our story editor on the show. But beyond that, taking that writing and pulling the performances out through the boards was just, there's been nothing like it. I owe them so much.
Yeah, we'll give them a round of applause for them right now, because I mean, yeah, they
Yay.
deserve all of that. Because I
They
mean,
were spectacular.
it truly shines. The show truly shines because of all of that they do. It's
You know how you can tell? Listen, you know how you can tell that if you don't know any better, if you know how, when board artists are great and are proud of their work, is that they're posting them online. In other words, like,
Mhm.
you're not going to find a ton of storyboard examples from board teams on a lot of other shows.
Mhm.
There might be like art of like backgrounds and maybe some character designs, but you don't see a ton of storyboard examples. And our team has been so proud of putting their boards up on online, on Twitter and on
Mm.
Instagram and on Tumblr. That's when you know that they're proud of their work and it's worthy to be proud of. And I love that they're doing that, and they should be proud because they did stuff on this show that uh nobody has done in their shows, in terms of emotion, in terms of action, in terms of comedy, in terms of the musical sequences. The musical sequences were all spectacular, just across the board. Just across the board.
Yeah, and actually, that does kind of segue into another question I had. Favorite
Sure.
song from the series?
That's a tough one. Of course, looking back on it, Nothing Left to Lose was such a, it came out so great. But um, Varians is such a great, it's a hard one to answer, but I think we threw the javelin story wise at Waiting in the Wings so far ahead of the game
Hmm.
that by the time it landed, like, I knew I wanted to do that song so far in advance, and there was such a lot of pressure on me from myself on that song that by the time we landed it, and again, like, Mercury did the spectacular animation, and our team had done the boards, and Alan's colors in it, like, it just is such, like, it's Broadway worthy and feature worthy.
Hmm.
I remember seeing it the first time we saw the sequence. We were in Canada, and they played for us the first takes of the animation, and I teared up. I was like, this is exactly what I wanted this thing to be. Not just this song, but this series. Because that was really, outside of Jeremy's song, in season 1, like this was the moment when I was like, this is what this series is about. It's about this longing. It's about this kind of really deep-seated emotion from this character, and even when Shane Prigmore was doing the initial designs for the characters, I was telling Shane early on, like, Shane, you got to design the characters so that they can pull off this moment, waiting in the wings. Like, any other design that you come up with, if it can't pull off this level of emotion, we got to reconsider. Because some of his designs early on were a little bit too simplistic, some of them were too realistic. It was this balance between something that could be executed weekly, but also be able to pull off this level of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw Waiting in the Wings, I was like, we really, and again, like, we're 2 years into it, but I was like, we really did it, and I really felt for Cassandra, and that's when I really knew that the all of the pieces had come together, and I'm so proud of that song. And then beyond that, the reprise in season 3 with young Cassandra being able to kind of pull that off. Again, like, the two of those together, I think I'm the most proud of that whole little setup and payoff.
Oh yeah.
Baby Cassandra's so cute.
She was so cute, and again, like, recording it was I don't know if you guys have seen the Instagram. On my Instagram, I have the little video of the of the little actress that pulled it off, and it's just so heartbreaking to watch her do it. And she understood kind of what was happening in the in the story, and it was so emotional.
Yeah. Actually, KP, do we have any quick fan questions we can slide in since we're on the topic of these kinds of questions that maybe he can answer?
I had my own quick fan question.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering who Cass's dad was, because, like, her biological dad.
Boy, you really know how to get to the good question. Okay,
I'm just,
so
like, timeline-wise, like,
Yeah.
and then people, like, were like, how does the flower work if,
Yeah.
Gothel can only be young
Yeah.
for, like, a day? Okay.
No, I get it. No, I get it. I get what you're saying. Now, here's my answer, and this is kind of an answer that a lot of people have been waiting for. And when I first pitched this story, this is gonna, me by now. Now we're an hour into this interview, and you're gonna know this is gonna be a long-winded answer.
It's okay.
So going into the series, I knew, mythology wise, what the mythology was, and I knew that everything I built into the mythology really only had one purpose, and the purpose was to push Rapunzel into the place where she could be a ruler and a great daughter, an honoring daughter, and a fiance slash wife. Like, all of the things that we were doing in the show was pushing her towards that end, right? So everything I put into play was really Rapunzel centric. Okay, so even when I put together Cassandra, the Gothel connection, the Black Rocks, the Moonstone, and the Sun Drop, and all of these pieces of the mythology really only led to pushing Rapunzel. Even the Varian stuff, everything was put into play to 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 really push Rapunzel. Okay, so as I'm pitching this story to all of these people, my pitch when it came to the end of the last beat, and Cassandra releases the stone, and Rapunzel becomes one with this thing and sends it back out into the heavens, and Cassandra gets on a horse, and I would always say that Cassandra runs off into Spin-Off-Utopia, right? Like, I always just kind of like landed this idea that, like, there's another part of this show, which is kind of, for me, a Cassandra spinoff, right? I would have loved to have done that. And all that to say that it didn't matter to me who her father was, because I'm only telling Rapunzel's story. Now, if I were to then do a Cassandra story where Cassandra's story becomes the center piece of where I need to take her, then the challenge of who is her father, where does she go, what is her life like, once she becomes the center of all of these questions, then I can answer them with an entire other story, right?
Right.
So I may know in my dumb brain like who I think her father is, but none of that makes a lick of difference unless I have a story that I want to tell. Does that make
Oh
sense?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would shy away from thinking of, listen, people can write all the fan theories and fan fiction they want, and I encourage that every single time I can. Writing is healthy. Writing is fun. It's a huge part of taking an active part in being a fan. So I say go crazy and come up with all your fun ideas. I know I have my own fun ideas, but until I have a specific idea of where Cassandra needs to end, it doesn't make any sense for me um to go down that road unless I have the whole thing planned out, and which I did for Rapunzel, and that's why it made sense um, for me to answer the amount of questions that I did in the show. And I always say, whatever happened on screen happened on screen.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't happen on screen, you can make up you're absolutely free to write your own fan theories. But until that becomes the center priority for me, I'm gonna plead the fifth on it.
That's fair.
So sorry to be a letdown for information, but that's my answer, and I'm sticking with it.
Fair enough. Just like, oh man. Lauren, do you have any
But I
questions?
guarantee you, your answer for yourself is not wrong.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
I
fair.
was gonna say that I did see that someone asked about Varian's blue streak and the origin of
Yeah, yeah,
that. So
yeah. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, guys, but the blue streak is nothing. I mean, it just was a thing where, we were. This is such a bad story. It's such a terrible story, and people will say that we were lazy, but at the end of the day, it was just something that Ben had put in as just an interest for the character, just like a color interest. We were looking at the character in terms of like um, these large shapes, and Ben felt like breaking it up with this fun little piece of blue. I'll be 100% honest and tell you that even when I looked at it, it read to me as kind of like a highlight, like a piece of light hitting the hair.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how I read it when we were doing the color approvals. But subsequently, Ben was just like, oh, maybe something happened in the lab and it turned it blue. It never had a mythology reason. And, it tore us apart when the fans were creating this like theory behind all this stuff because, first of all, it was super fun to read all this fan theory. But the fact of the matter is that it just became a design thing that we both really loved and wanted to keep, but we had no frame of reference that anybody would care as much as they ultimately did about it. Because again, like we're designing him in an office at like 6 o'clock at night in a year before the episode even airs. We have no idea how huge of a impact Varian is going to be on the the mythology, on the story. Varian was not part of my original pitch. He came very much later in the story development phase. The fact that he was so important and such an appealing character speaks to our writers and speaks to Jeremy and the presence that he brought to the character. Um, but this idea that, the moon thing is baked in him. Listen, I don't know if we do a spinoff, maybe there is a reason for it, but I will tell you 100% honestly that when Ben drew it and I approved it, it just was it just looked cool. Like, is that, I hate to
Yeah,
say it, like, it just looked fun.
everyone just loves the edgy boy, so
And as well, and listen, I do too. I'm right with him, and I love the edgy boy. I love emo boy who's just wants to make his dad proud. Like, at the end of the day, that's who I am too. Like, I'm just a kid that wants to make sure that his parents, know that I have different interests than them. Like, a lot of that was so much of what made Varian so appealing was the reality of that, and the honest part of that is that a lot of us struggle with. And, the other thing about Varian that is so amazing is that at the end of the day he was right. There was something to this mythology, and he was, as the villain in season 1. The problem with that whole thing is that he wasn't wrong.
Exactly.
He went about it in a really dark, terrible way, but he was right. There was, like, they shouldn't have ignored these rocks in the same way that Dad should not have ignored Rapunzel. Do you see how those things kind of
Mm-hmm.
line up? Like,
Mhm.
everybody was ignoring the growth of these rocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same way that King Frederick was ignoring his growing daughter.
Yeah.
That's
But
the correlation between the two. That's why we came up with Varian, is because we needed to show what it looks like when people ignore a power that they don't know anything about. And again, poor Frederick, who's me, I'm just the dad who didn't see my daughters as being the capable, strong young women that they are. I struggled with that because I was living in a household where they were getting older and thinking that they were still young, young ladies, but they were growing up into these capable, amazing young women. And I wanted to give Frederick that same struggle. And ultimately it made more sense because nobody wants to see no one wants to see a show about a, frustrated dad. It made more sense to give that struggle to Varian in the kingdom, and ultimately that's kind of what became the appeal of him.
No, and it was the perfect path to go on, especially to weave those parallels together.
Yep. Thank you. It just was so frustrating to see so many people like being distracted by the Varian aspect, as appealing and as much as I loved him, but the real struggle in the show was poor Rapunzel, really, really kind of struggling to find her way in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I mean, I think at that time too, people just weren't expecting Varian like a because usually how especially animated series go, with like Aladdin and all that stuff. There's always just a pre-established villain that's there to serve the purpose of the plot, and then they go away. No one kind of expects like the friend to kind of have this moment of betrayal and then become the villain.
Nobody expects that except me. No, but I think what made that so uh what made that so surprising was the same thing that I think a lot of people kind of struggle with, is the idea that that does happen in real life. Sometimes your friends do, turn on you, and you're left with these questions. Of course, like the Cassandra thing, like her best friend turning on her. But I mean, how many times does that actually happen? And how many times does it happen when your best friend is listening to some jerk who's feeding them lies, or feeding them things that they just want to hear?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was the most taken with how much people hated the enchanted girl, like Zantiri,
Mm-hmm.
the young girl version of her. How much anger we got towards that character. And what I came to really understand is that, like, we all deal with people in our lives that kind of feed us the things that we want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's ourself. Sometimes, we did kind of straddle that idea of, is this enchanted girl real, or is it somebody inside of Cassandra's head? Because a lot of times the big misinformation that we're getting comes from us. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw the audience on Twitter or on Tumblr really growing in frustration about her, the conversation to me started being like I felt like the more upset people were with her, the more likely it was that they had somebody in their life that they were listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I just felt like it was really hitting in a very real way, to the people that were probably really struggling with that.
Yeah, it's the echo chamber effect where you the thing is you can't grow if you keep hearing the things you want to hear because then you're not going to
Yeah,
change. There's no point. But
exactly.
then if you're getting all of
Yeah.
these, if it's hitting a certain chord with you, then that should be a sign you should probably look into that and do something about that and change. That's the point.
And here's the thing that's gonna bake your noodle about this whole thing. If you think about it from, and again, this might be a little bit too deep, so please feel free to delete or fast forward.
Go ahead. We're
It
entertained.
if you think about it from Zantiri's point of view and think about maybe the fact that, once they all went into the House of Yesterday's Tomorrow, and Zantiri is maybe getting into each of their heads, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who of them is the least threat? In other words, Zantiri knew that she couldn't go through Eugene
Mm-mm.
because Eugene had a very pure love for Rapunzel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the thing that we knew. Like, if we had to put a plot together where Eugene turned on Rapunzel, we couldn't do that because everybody knew that they got married.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Like, there's nothing at stake. So the only way that it made sense plot wise for us to have something that nobody knew was the fact that Cass wasn't at the wedding. So the fact that Cass wasn't at the wedding gave us an opportunity to take the relationship in a direction that was mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to pull any other chord and say, nobody necessarily cared if Lance turned on her. It really came down to, again, like it came down to whether it was going to be Eugene or Cassandra that was going to turn on her. The no-brainer was that Eugene would never turn on her. And again, like, Zantiri knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And who was the person that she could get to with not a lie, with an actual truth? And the truth of the matter was, she was the daughter of Gothel, and she always struggled with waiting in the wings. And because Zantiri knew that truth, she used that to her advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the kind of the clutch for it. And we knew that there was going to be a lot of struggle. I still see that people struggle with the fact that Cassandra, turned really, late in the game, um, back to Rapunzel. But we knew that if Cassandra turned back to the good side too early, the story's over.
Mm-hmm.
As
Mm-hmm.
soon as Cassandra goes back to Rapunzel, the story's over. No, what else are we fighting for? Really, the only thing that we're fighting for in this series is for these two best friends to make up, and we had to keep that on the hook for as long as possible. And I thought, in terms of the boards and the performance, Wendy Sullivan's boards at the end of season 3 in the tower,
Mm-hmm.
the apology sequences were just so beautiful and so full of heart. And Eden and Mandy's performances just were some of the best that we'd ever gotten on the series, and some of the best that I've seen on television.
Were you in the booth when they were recording that, out of curiosity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, the crazy thing about it is that we did them separately. But I have an amazing voice director named Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who is an amazing director for voice. So I sit next to her, and how we do it is there's a booth, we have an actor in the booth, it's Mary Elizabeth and myself. I will tell Mary Elizabeth what I want from a performance, and from an actor's standpoint, she gives direction in a way that I could never, or at least don't have any context to give. And she pulls out of these performers some of the most touching and beautiful performances that I've ever heard. And what happens is she reads the other side.
Mm.
So whether she's reading Eugene or she's reading, Mandy or Zach or whoever, so in those sequences, she's reading the opposite side to I think we did Eden first, and then we did Mandy. So we have an amazing team in the technician booth as well, that what they can do is once we get one side of it, so once Mary Elizabeth reads to Eden and gets all of Eden's lines, then we can separate those all out into different files. So when Mandy comes in, Mandy can read through it and we can play the other files. So she's essentially playing against Cassandra. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's happening separately, but in a very kind of intimate way. It's just, just in terms of people's schedules, like Eden is in New York, Mandy's out here. Sometimes, Zach is in wherever he's at shooting Shazam or whatever. So it's hard to get anybody ever in the booth together. So it just became a matter of really working the magic, and Mary Elizabeth was so great at doing that.
Yeah, I know that feel of trying to coordinate things, and it can be hard. It can be hard when the actors aren't in the same physical space, but there's really good ways to get around it.
Yeah, almost impossible, especially with our amazing cast. People are always working on different things, and it was hard to ever get anybody together in the booth. The only time we ever really did it, it was with Pete and Stan. A lot of times when we had Pete and Stan together, we put them in the booth together to read off of each other.
Oh God, I love Pete and Stan.
They're the best.
I think I'm good, Lauren. Do you have any other questions?
I feel like everything got covered. I'm like going through all my questions. I think everything got covered, even when I didn't have to ask about it.
Let me just answer my own question here.
Sure.
Of my question to myself would be, how much do I love you guys and the fans? Going into this show, a big part of what I wanted to make sure that we held very high was the opinion from the fans of the film. It was certainly a large task to go into this thing knowing that the expectations were so high from a fan base that is so dedicated to the mythology and to these characters and to this entire franchise. But coming out the other side of it and seeing how much we were embraced, how much people love these characters as much as we do, I couldn't be more proud of the show and just how amazing the fans have been with the fan art, with the cosplay, with the covers of the songs, with the reaction videos. I mean, I'm seriously going to get choked up thinking about it right now, but just the responses from the fans have just been so amazing. And just the fact that you guys have a podcast about it, that you want to talk about it about, is so great. And I hope you get a chance to talk to more artists that worked on the show, and writers or whoever, and get their viewpoints of it. Everybody just put so much of their heart into it, and to know that the fans responded in such a big way is just the best. So thank you to everybody who has sent emails and tweets and Tumblr posts. And again, the artwork has just been so great, and I will do my best to like and share and comment on as much as I can, because without you guys, we would be nothing.
Yeah. And we can't thank you enough for being on the show with us. I was so excited when your name got announced for this.
Well, anything I can do to say thank you to our fans. I'm sad that it's over, but I'm glad that everybody enjoyed our last few episodes, and I can't wait for you guys to see what I have planned next.
Hint, hint, wink, wink. Um,
Yeah, it's gonna be
I
special.
have one more question, but it will kind of tie into what you already talked
Sure.
about a little bit. So, part of the
Yeah.
podcast is kind of reintroducing creators to fans of properties like maybe from back in the day, and they don't really know, like, the internet is forever and there's still people that care about their properties that, like, 20 years ago or what have you, and
Yeah.
they don't know that the internet exists sometimes. So since you're very active on social media, how has that impacted, you on any level? How has that improved the experience as far as just being a creator and making the show?
Mm.
I can't imagine a universe where, as a kid, me being able to to tell the creator of the A Team how much I love the show. Like just being able to hear from the fans on such a one-to-one basis is such a blessing, and it's such a rare thing. I mean, it's not rare now. I mean, anybody really has access to the people that they love that make the shows that they love so much. But being able to see the impact on people is so great, and I would highly encourage, just complimenting the things that you love online, and the creators. They do work hard, and they do, all the shows that you guys respond to and love. There are a huge amount of crew members behind those things that give so much, and their families, the families of the people that work on these shows, that maybe don't see them for weekends because they're working hard on backgrounds or revisions that need to be in by Monday so that we can ship on whatever. Like, they give so much to these projects, and just going on Twitter and saying, "Hey, I love your guys' show," it really does mean a lot, and I would encourage people to keep doing that, because I know personally it means a lot to me.
Yeah, I applaud you for just being so vocal, and, like, for instance, this interview was pretty easy to get a hold of you, and it's always intimidating, especially with dealing with EPs and, like, the higher level production. I'm just like, oh god, do they
Sure.
want to be on my stupid podcast or our stupid podcast? So
It's not stupid. It is definitely special, and it is a new way of expressing passion for these great characters and for these amazing stories. And I will do anything I can to promote that kind of interaction, because I think it's important that people know that there is a great audience that appreciate this hard work that we put into these shows.
yeah, I just really appreciate this conversation. This was great. Me and Lauren are like animation fangirls, so we're like having a good time right now.
Yeah, and
Yay!
then I
Yay!
was I went to school for animation. I went to LMU for animation and minored in studio arts. And for ever since I could first learn how to draw, all I wanted to do was be in animation. So it's just like it's been my life.
Wow. Well, keep at it. I don't know if you're writing, but always write uh things that write about the world around you, draw about the world around you. I always encourage people to, if you're going to be out life drawing, like, draw the world around you, draw things that speak to you. Don't just draw things that you see on the internet, but go outside and experience life, and put those things into your work, because that's going to make things it's going to make your work that much more lush,
hmm
and it's going to be better for you as an artist if you can reflect your life into your
Oh
work.
yeah. It's like I love any chance I have where anything that inspires me. It's like I always try to keep a sketchbook or even my iPad with me because
Great.
Procreate is a saint and a savior.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It makes that connection so much easier to make, and you can share stuff really quickly. I would encourage you to try your hand at, like, getting some paper and making sure you keep a physical sketchbook close as well, because there's something about paper that is unmatched, and I think we're losing a little bit of these days. But I encourage you to keep drawing, and you're gonna be great.
Thank you. I think I have like 20 sketchbooks, if not more, in my closet. So
Great, good, good. Fill them up.
We're gonna have a party. We're gonna have a big bonfire. You know, the whole thing, right?
Oh. Well, thank you guys so much for having me on your podcast. You're the best. I love the fans that reach out and are risky enough to ask people to be on. So keep doing that, and I encourage you, and I can't wait to work with you guys someday.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm like, please
Thank you
hire
for
us.
joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
course.
This was a great conversation.
All right. Well, that's me, and I'm signing off. And have a great night.
Thanks you
Thank
too.
you guys.
And good night, everybody.
All right.
See you next Wednesday
night.
on Animation Communication. Woo. Here's my amazing outro.
Thank you so much for listening to Animation Communication on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider. We are really hoping this show makes a difference in how people view animation and media, as well as giving and providing advice for people all over the world who like or want to join the animation or media industry. If you liked what you heard, please remember to subscribe and rate those 5 stars, as well as tell your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our main YouTube channel, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, and turn those notifications on. My name is Scribbler, and you have been listening to Animation Communication.